We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
Subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell. Turn on every...
For months, one question has followed the Nancy Guthrie case like a shadow. Where is Nancy? But now the case may be moving toward a darker question. Not only where she is, but why she may have disappeared in the first place. Because according to the source material, new reports have raised the possibility that human remains may have been found in connection with the investigation. At this stage, there has been no official public confirmation that those remains belong to Nancy Guthrie, and no final forensic identification has been announced. That distinction matters. In any missing person case, remains are not identity until science confirms it. DNA, dental records, medical implants, and forensic comparison all have to speak before the public can say what investigators already may be testing. But even the possibility changes the atmosphere around the case. Because when a missing person investigation begins moving toward possible remains, the entire investigation shifts. The questions become heavier, the timeline becomes sharper, the people closest to the victim become more important, and motive begins to matter in a way it may not have before. In Nancy Guthrie's case, one alleged motive has now become impossible to ignore in public discussion: money. According to the source narrative, there were reported claims that Annie Guthrie allegedly asked her mother for a significant loan not long before Nancy vanished, and Nancy allegedly refused. That claim has not been officially confirmed by law enforcement, and the family has not publicly confirmed it on the record, so it must be treated carefully, as an allegation, not a proven fact. But in a serious investigation involving an elderly victim, investigators do not ignore financial pressure. They cannot, because money can change relationships. Money can turn quiet tension into resentment. Money can create urgency. Money can make people feel trapped. And sometimes, in the darkest cases, money can become the reason someone close to a victim begins seeing that victim not as family, but as an obstacle. That does not mean anyone is guilty. It does not mean the allegation is proven. It means investigators would have to look at the money trail. Carefully, quietly, completely. Nancy Guthrie was an elderly woman living in a valuable home in the Catalina foothills area. According to the source material, her home was reportedly worth around $1 million. Annie and Tommaso were reportedly living only a few miles away in a home of lower value. That kind of financial difference does not prove anything by itself. Many parents naturally accumulate more wealth than their adult children. That is normal. That is not evidence of a crime. But if there was a large loan request, and if Nancy said no, then the financial contrast becomes more important, because refusal changes the emotional temperature. Before a refusal, there may be hope. After a refusal, there may be anger. Before a refusal, there may be negotiation. After a refusal, there may be pressure. And in a family, pressure does not always explode loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly at the dinner table. Sometimes it hides behind polite conversation. Sometimes everyone smiles, but the tension is already in the room. That is why the final dinner matters. According to the source narrative, Nancy spent the evening of January 31st at Annie and Tommaso's home. Publicly, the dinner has not been described as a documented confrontation. There has been no confirmed report of shouting, no verified argument, no official statement saying the evening became explosive. But later that night, Tommaso reportedly drove Nancy home around 9:50 p.m., and that ride became one of the most important pieces of the timeline, because there was reportedly no Uber record for that ride home, no independent driver, no third-party witness, no outside person documenting exactly when Nancy entered the home, what condition she was in, or whether anything seemed wrong. According to the account, Tommaso said he saw Nancy safely inside, and after that, Nancy was not publicly confirmed alive again. That is where the case begins to tighten. From the reported drop-off around 9:50 p.m. until the 911 call around 12:30 p.m. the next day, there was a long gap, roughly 14 hours. 14 hours with no public confirmation that Nancy was okay. 14 hours where the timeline becomes critical. 14 hours where every device, every camera, every movement, every message, every phone call, and every silence becomes evidence or potential evidence. During that same overnight window, Nancy's doorbell camera reportedly stopped working around 1:47 a.m. Then, around 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker reportedly disconnected from her phone. Blood was later reportedly seen on the porch, and investigators reportedly documented no forced entry. That sequence is chilling, not because any single detail proves the full story, but because together the details create a frame: a dinner, a private ride home, a long silence, a camera issue, a pacemaker disconnect, blood on the porch, no forced entry, and an elderly woman gone. When investigators look at that kind of sequence, they are not only asking what happened. They are asking what happened first, what happened next, what was planned, what was accidental, what was staged, what was concealed, and who had both the access and the knowledge to move through that night without making it look obvious. That is where Nancy's vulnerability becomes one of the most important parts of the case. She lived alone. Her security system was reportedly not actively recording. She did not have a monitored alarm. She reportedly removed her hearing aids at night. She had no overnight caregiver. Those details are not random, they are intimate. They are the kind of personal routines someone close to her may have known. A stranger might not know when Nancy took out her hearing aids. A stranger might not know whether her alarm was monitored. A stranger might not know if her security system was recording. A stranger might not know her nighttime habits. But someone close to her might. And if investigators are looking at a possible staged abduction, that kind of knowledge becomes extremely important. Because staging requires confidence. It requires the person to believe they understand the victim, the house, the routine, the risk, the cameras, the response time, the possible witnesses. It also requires the person to believe they can direct suspicion away from themselves. That is why the reported masked figure, the camera disruption, and the possible ransom-style direction matter in the larger theory. If a case looks like an outside abduction, attention moves outward. Investigators look for strangers, unknown vehicles, masked intruders, ransom demands, online communications, suspicious activity in the neighborhood. That may be exactly what the person responsible would want if the true motive were closer to home. Again, that is only a theory. But it is the kind of theory investigators would examine because misdirection has appeared in many serious cases before. Sometimes an offender does not only commit the act, they try to write the first version of the story. They try to create the image they want police to believe. A masked figure, a mysterious stranger, a ransom narrative, a sudden disappearance, a victim taken into the night. But staged stories often have weak points. Digital evidence can expose them. Phone records can expose them. Vehicle data can expose them. Financial records can expose them. And forensic evidence can expose them. Because a staged story has to survive the facts. And facts are not emotional. They do not care who tells the best story. They only show what happened. This is why the alleged loan refusal matters so much. If true, it gives investigators a possible emotional and financial event shortly before Nancy vanished. A moment where a private family issue may have become a serious pressure point. Investigators would want to know several things. How much money was allegedly requested? When exactly was the request made? Was it in person, by phone, by text, or through another family member? Did Nancy refuse immediately? Did she explain why? Did the conversation become tense? Were there follow-up messages? Was anyone else aware of the request? Was there debt? Was there mortgage pressure? Were there business problems? Were there unpaid bills? Were financial documents changed? Were valuables moved? Were bank accounts accessed? Were legal papers updated? Were there estate discussions before or after Nancy disappeared? That is how financial motive is built. Not through one rumor, through records. A loan request alone is not enough. A refusal alone is not enough. A wealth difference alone is not enough. But when investigators combine financial pressure with opportunity, access, timing, vulnerability, device data, and forensic evidence, the picture can become much more serious. In court, greed is not proven by saying someone wanted money. Greed is proven by showing pressure, need, access, benefit, timing, behavior, and action. That is why bank records matter. That is why loan paperwork matters. That is why property documents matter. That is why estate plans matter. That is why power of attorney documents matter. That is why insurance policies matter. That is why phone records matter. That is why digital searches matter. Because motive is not just a feeling. Motive has a paper trail. And if investigators are considering a money motive in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, they would not stop at family rumors. They would follow the documents. According to the source narrative, a durable power of attorney was reportedly signed in May 2025, naming Annie as the agent over Tommaso's financial and property matters. On its face, that may be ordinary paperwork. Families sign legal documents for many innocent reasons. Spouses manage financial matters. Health, travel, business, and household needs can all explain legal authority. But in an investigation where financial strain is being discussed, ordinary documents can become important, not because they prove wrongdoing, but because they help investigators understand who controlled what, who had authority, who had financial responsibility, who could move money, who could sign documents, who may have known about debts, assets, or pressure inside the household. And when that legal paperwork is placed beside the larger timeline, investigators would likely look closely at the sequence. Financial authority reportedly formalized months earlier, an alleged loan request later, a reported refusal, a family dinner, a private ride home, a silent overnight gap, a camera going dark, a pacemaker disconnect, a 911 call, a vehicle reportedly held for deep forensic testing, possible remains discussed in reports. That sequence does not equal guilt, but it does explain why the financial angle is so serious. Because investigators do not look at money in isolation. They look at money as part of the full structure. Was there pressure before the disappearance? Was there opportunity during the disappearance? Was there unusual behavior after the disappearance? Was there any attempt to access property, documents, belongings, accounts, or control? Was there any statement that changed? Was there any emergency call that included information the caller should not have known? Was there any digital pattern that suggested panic? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. The sealed 911 call may become one of the most important pieces of the case. First calls can be powerful. They capture the first official version of the story. The caller's tone, the details they volunteer, the details they avoid, the order in which they present information, whether they ask for help, whether they focus on themselves, whether they show knowledge that does not match what should have been known at that moment. None of that is proof by itself. People react differently in emergencies. Some panic, some sound flat, some speak strangely because shock affects the mind. But investigators still analyze the call because it is a time-stamped record of the first public alarm. And if the 911 call conflicts with later forensic findings, it can become very important. That may be one reason the public is so focused on it. But the public does not have the full recording. Investigators do. And in a case like this, silence does not always mean nothing is happening. Sometimes silence means law enforcement is protecting evidence, protecting strategy, protecting witnesses, protecting a potential prosecution. That is frustrating for viewers. It is painful for family, but it can be necessary because once key details are released, everyone knows them, including the person responsible. That is why investigators often hold back certain facts. They do not reveal exactly what was found. They do not reveal exactly what a witness said. They do not reveal every device timestamp. They do not reveal every vehicle result. They do not reveal every forensic lead, because hidden details are how they test people. They let someone tell a story. Then they compare it to facts that have never been made public. If the story matches, that matters. If the story fails, that matters even more. That brings us back to the vehicle. According to the source material, Annie's Honda CR-V was reportedly held for more than 40 days for forensic testing. A vehicle is not usually held that long unless investigators believe there may be something worth examining. But again, holding a vehicle does not automatically mean guilt. It means the vehicle may be relevant enough to test. And vehicle testing can either strengthen a theory or destroy it. If the car shows movement during the critical overnight window, that matters. If the movement aligns with phone data, that matters. If the vehicle contains biological evidence, fibers, soil, or trace material connected to Nancy or a relevant location, that matters. But if it does not, that matters too. Because real investigations must eliminate as well as accuse. A theory is only as strong as the evidence that survives. And that is what makes the Nancy Guthrie case feel so tense. Right now, according to the source story, the public has patterns. The reported loan refusal, the financial contrast, the final dinner, the private ride home, the long silence, the camera disruption, the pacemaker disconnect, the sealed 911 call, the vehicle testing, the unconfirmed reports of remains. But pattern is not verdict. Pattern is not conviction. Pattern is where investigators begin. Proof is where they must end. That is the line this documentary has to respect. Because it is easy to turn suspicion into certainty. It is easy to say greed did it. It is easy to say a refusal caused the disappearance. It is easy to point to family conflict and assume the worst. But real cases require more. They require evidence that stands up in court. Evidence that can survive cross-examination. Evidence that can connect motive to opportunity and opportunity to action. Without that, the financial theory remains a theory, a serious one, a troubling one, but still a theory. And Annie Guthrie, Tommaso, and every person publicly discussed in connection with this case remain presumed innocent unless charges are filed and guilt is proven in a court of law. That is not just legal language, it matters. Because the purpose of true crime documentary storytelling should not be to destroy people with speculation. It should be to examine facts, question inconsistencies, and follow evidence carefully. Nancy deserves that. Her family deserves that. And the public deserves that. But careful does not mean ignoring the obvious questions. And the obvious question is this. If Nancy refused a major request for money shortly before she disappeared, did that refusal create pressure inside the family? And if it did that pressure connect to the events of January 31st? That is where part one should leave the audience. not with an accusation, not with a conclusion, but with the weight of a possible motive sitting beside a disturbing timeline: an elderly woman, a valuable home, a reported loan request, a reported refusal, a final family dinner, a private ride home, a long silence, a camera disruption, a pacemaker disconnect, a sealed emergency call, a vehicle under forensic review, and possible remains that, if confirmed, could move this case into an entirely different phase. For now, the money motive remains unproven. But investigators know one thing better than anyone. When someone disappears from a place they should have been safe, the truth is rarely found in one detail. It is found where the details begin to line up. The deeper this case goes, the more one theme keeps coming back: pressure, not just emotional pressure, financial pressure, timeline pressure, forensic pressure, and pressure inside a family story that still has too many unanswered questions. Because when investigators look at a possible financial motive, they are not only asking whether someone wanted money, they are asking whether money created urgency, whether urgency created conflict, whether conflict created opportunity, and whether opportunity lined up with the exact night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. That is why the alleged loan refusal matters so much. According to the source material, one of the most discussed claims is that Annie Guthrie allegedly asked her mother for a significant loan shortly before Nancy vanished, and Nancy reportedly refused. That claim has not been officially confirmed by investigators, so it must remain an allegation. But if it is true, it could become one of the most important emotional and financial moments in the entire timeline. Because in family cases, the word no can carry more weight than people realize. It can change the room. It can change relationships. It can turn private frustration into resentment. It can make someone feel rejected, cornered, embarrassed, or desperate. And in a case involving an elderly woman, a valuable home, possible inheritance, and alleged financial strain, investigators would have to ask whether that refusal was only a family disagreement or whether it became something much darker. But motive alone is never enough. A money problem does not prove a crime. A loan request does not prove a crime. A refusal does not prove a crime. Even family tension does not prove a crime. What matters is whether the financial issue connects to evidence. That is where the case becomes more serious, because investigators would not look at the alleged loan refusal by itself. They would place it beside everything else: Nancy's final dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home, the reported private ride home, the lack of an independent Uber record for the return trip, the long overnight gap, the doorbell camera reportedly stopping at 1:47 a.m., the pacemaker reportedly disconnecting from Nancy's phone at 2:28 a.m., blood reportedly found on the porch, no documented forced entry, the sealed 911 call, a vehicle reportedly held for extensive forensic testing, and now reports suggesting possible human remains may have been found, though not officially identified as Nancy. That is not a simple collection of details. That is a structure. And if investigators are studying a possible financial motive, they would be trying to determine whether that structure points toward planning, opportunity, concealment, or misdirection. The sealed 911 call may eventually become one of the most important pieces of this case, because first calls tell investigators a lot. They show who raised the alarm, when the alarm was raised, what the caller said first, what details were volunteered, what details were missing, whether the caller sounded confused, frightened, calm, rehearsed, or strangely specific. But it is also important to be careful. People react differently under stress. Some people panic. Some sound cold because shock has frozen them. Some talk too much. Some barely speak. So the sound of a person's voice alone is not proof. But the content of the call can matter. If someone reveals knowledge they should not have had yet, investigators notice. If the timeline in the call does not match later evidence, investigators notice. If the first emergency report seems to shape the story in a particular direction, investigators notice. And if the 911 call remains sealed, that may mean authorities are protecting details that still matter to the investigation. That silence can feel frustrating to the public. But in a case like this, silence may be strategy. Investigators may be holding back facts only the real person responsible would know. They may be protecting witness information. They may be waiting for lab results. They may be comparing the call against forensic findings. They may be building a case slowly because they know every word, every timestamp, and every physical detail could be challenged later in court. That is the difference between public suspicion and prosecution. Public suspicion can move fast. Prosecution has to survive. It has to survive defense attorneys. It has to survive expert witnesses. It has to survive cross-examination. It has to survive questions about contamination, timing, motive, access, and alternative explanations. That is why the financial angle, if it is real, must be built carefully. Investigators would need records, bank statements, loan messages, texts, emails, phone logs, property records, insurance documents, estate papers, power of attorney documents, debt records, mortgage history, credit activity, search history, and any communication showing pressure before Nancy disappeared. Because a prosecutor cannot simply stand in court and say, someone wanted money. They have to show why money mattered. They have to show how badly it mattered. They have to show timing. They have to show opportunity. They have to show benefit. And then they have to connect it to the physical facts of the case. That is where the reported power of attorney detail becomes important. According to the source material, in May 2025, a durable power of attorney was reportedly signed naming Annie as the agent over Tommaso's financial and property matters. On its own, that does not prove anything improper. Many couples and family members create legal authority for ordinary reasons. But if investigators are examining financial pressure, documents like that can help them understand who had control, who had responsibility, and who may have known the true financial condition of the household. Legal paperwork can tell investigators a lot. Who could sign? Who could act? Who could move property? Who had financial authority? Who knew about debts? Who knew about assets? Who may have been under pressure? And who may have seen Nancy's money or property as a possible solution? Again, none of that equals guilt, but it gives investigators a map. And once investigators have a map, they start comparing it to the timeline. The timeline is where this case becomes chilling. January 31st, the family dinner, the ride home, the reported last confirmed sighting, then the overnight hours, the doorbell camera issue, the pacemaker disconnect, the blood, the silence, the 911 call the next day. Those hours are the heart of the case. If Nancy was alive and safe after being dropped off, what happened later? If someone came to her home in the middle of the night, how did they know when to come? How did they know she lived alone? How did they know her security weaknesses? How did they know whether she could hear them? How did they know whether cameras were recording? How did they get close without a clear forced entry? And if the story of an outside abduction was staged, who would have had enough knowledge to stage it convincingly? That is the question investigators would have to ask. Because staging is not random. Staging has a purpose. It is meant to move attention away from the truth. A masked figure can make a case look like a stranger attack. A ransom-style story can point suspicion toward unknown criminals. A broken camera can create confusion. A long silence can buy time. A vehicle can move evidence. A sealed call can preserve the first official version of the story. And possible remains, if confirmed, could reveal whether the original narrative was real or constructed. That is why unconfirmed reports of remains matter so much. If remains have truly been found, the investigation would move into a new scientific phase: DNA comparison, identification, cause of death, time of death, soil analysis, location analysis, trace evidence, concealment patterns. And if the location of those remains connects to someone close to Nancy, or to property, vehicles, routes, or movements already under review, then the financial motive theory becomes even more serious. Because concealment is not just an act, it is a decision. Where remains are placed can say a lot. It can suggest panic, it can suggest planning, it can suggest familiarity with a location, it can suggest confidence, it can suggest a belief that the area would not be searched quickly. And if investigators can connect a concealment site to financial motive, opportunity, and digital movement, the case changes. But until there is official identification, the public has to be careful. Possible remains are not confirmed remains. Reports are not forensic conclusions. Suspicion is not proof. And no person should be declared guilty because a theory sounds convincing. That is the balance this case demands. The money theory may be serious, but it is still a theory until evidence supports it. And that evidence must be strong. If prosecutors ever tried to argue greed as a motive, they would likely need several things to line up. First, they would need proof that the financial pressure was real. That could come from debts, unpaid bills, foreclosure concerns, business problems, or urgent need for cash. Second, they would need proof that a request for money was actually made and refused. That could come from messages, witness statements, bank records, notes, or testimony. Third, they would need proof that the refusal happened close enough to Nancy's disappearance to matter. Timing is everything. A disagreement months earlier may mean one thing. A major refusal shortly before the final dinner means something very different. Fourth, they would need opportunity. Who had access to Nancy? Who saw her last? Who knew her routine? Who could enter her world without alarming her? Fifth, they would need physical or digital evidence linking the theory to action. Phone movement, vehicle data, camera footage, DNA, blood evidence, trace evidence, statements, search history, location history, device activity. Without that final connection, motive remains incomplete. because motive explains why someone might do something. Evidence shows whether they did. That is the key difference. And in Nancy Guthrie's case, the evidence may still be moving quietly behind the scenes. The source material describes several details that investigators may be studying closely. The reported loan refusal, the financial context, the final ride home, the long silence, the camera disruption, the pacemaker disconnect, the sealed emergency call, and a vehicle reportedly held for forensic review. That is why this case feels like it is standing at a crossroads. If the possible remains are not Nancy, the search continues and the case remains open in another way. But if the remains are identified as Nancy, everything shifts. The case may move from disappearance to possible homicide. The timeline becomes a death timeline. The final dinner becomes a more serious event. The ride home becomes a more important moment. The financial records become more central. The vehicle testing becomes more urgent. The 911 call becomes more powerful. The pacemaker data becomes a silent witness. And every person close to the final known hours comes under sharper scrutiny. That does not mean instant arrest. It means the case enters a more dangerous phase. Dangerous for the person responsible. Dangerous for any false story. Dangerous for anyone whose account does not match the science. Because science does not care about emotion. DNA does not care about family loyalty. Vehicle data does not care about excuses. Bank records do not care about sympathy. Pacemaker data does not care about theories. A timestamp does not care who sounds believable. It simply exists. And when enough timestamps line up, a story begins to form. That may be what investigators are waiting for now. Convergence. The moment when separate pieces of evidence begin telling the same story. Financial pressure, denied money, final contact, opportunity, device data, vehicle movement, forensic findings, behavior after the disappearance. If those pieces point in different directions, the case stays complicated. But if they begin pointing in the same direction, the investigation changes fast. That is why law enforcement may be so quiet. They may not want to reveal what is aligning. They may not want to alert the person they are watching. They may not want to explain the meaning of the pacemaker data. They may not want to reveal what the vehicle did or did not contain. They may not want to release the 911 call because it may contain a detail that only matters when compared with evidence the public has not seen. Silence can be frustrating, but silence can also mean precision. And precision is what this case needs. Because Nancy Guthrie's story should not be turned into reckless accusation. It should be handled like what it is: a serious investigation involving an elderly woman, possible family pressure, possible financial motive, and unconfirmed reports that could change the case forever. This is also where we have to remember the human side. Nancy was not just a name in a headline. She was a mother, a grandmother, a retired teacher, an elderly woman who should have been protected, not vulnerable. Whatever happened to her, the answer matters. It matters to her family. It matters to her community. It matters to everyone watching this case because cases involving older victims expose a painful truth. Sometimes danger does not come from far away. Sometimes it comes from access, from knowledge, from proximity, from someone who knows the routine, someone who knows the weaknesses, someone who knows what to say at the door, someone who knows when the lights go out. That is why investigators cannot ignore the people closest to the timeline. But they also cannot accuse without proof. That is the tension in this case. The facts are serious, the theories are disturbing, but the final answer must come from evidence. If the alleged loan refusal is true, it may become one of the most important emotional moments in the case. If financial pressure is documented, it may give motive structure. If the vehicle evidence connects, it may give movement structure. If the pacemaker data aligns, it may give biological timing. If the 911 call contains contradictions, it may give behavioral evidence. If remains are identified, it may give the investigation a final physical anchor. And if all of those pieces begin to connect, then what once looked like a disappearance may become a case built around motive, opportunity, and concealment. But for now, the public must wait. Wait for official identification. Wait for forensic confirmation. Wait for law enforcement to say what they can prove. Wait for the evidence to move from theory to fact. That waiting is painful. But it is necessary because in the end, justice is not about the fastest theory. It is about the strongest proof. If you have credible information related to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact law enforcement immediately. You can call the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. You can also submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. If an official reward is being offered in connection with the case, credible information that helps investigators may qualify under the terms set by law enforcement or the family. Always confirm reward details through official sources before sharing or relying on reward claims. This video is created for documentary, educational, and information